This is One on One. We're now joined by Tricia and Kurt Baker, who are the co-founders of an organization, a very important organization called Attitudes in Reverse, or otherwise known as AIR. Good to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having us today.
You're here for a very special reason. Your son, Kenny, at 19 years of age, on May 19th, 2009, after suffering from depression,
Yes.
committed suicide. And you and your family decided to start this organization because?
Well, essentially what happened was the day that Kenny passed, it was a public death, and our neighbors were being contacted by a local tabloid, and we're going to write a story. And this was within hours of his death. And we knew a story was going to be written that wasn't necessarily going to be positive. And we just happened to have a good friend of ours who was a reporter who essentially talked to the paper, and we were able to talk to them more directly and put out the real story that was actually going on with Kenny's illness, his diagnosis, what was going on, the fact that he had been suffering with anxiety and depression for over 3 years, and we'd done many different things to try to help him. And unfortunately, he was just a very severe case, and we did lose him, unfortunately, on May 19th, 2009.
And the organization was created to achieve what?
It was actually the brainchild of our daughter, Caitlin.
Caitlin was younger.
She was younger. Right. She's 3 years younger than Kenny. So at the age of 16, she met with a lot of discrimination due to her brother's illness and to the way he died.
She did?
She did, yes. There's so much misunderstanding about mental health issues and suicide. And she knew that we needed to change something, because she said to me, she goes, Mom, there's a lot of other young kids who are struggling and they're embarrassed to talk about it. They're afraid to ask for help. So her idea was AIR. She said mental illness is like air, and she came up with the whole concept that, it's all around us, and just because you don't see it. And it was her idea to come up with a T-shirt contest, and that's how we started. We put it out there so that kids could design, something creative. We pick a winner, and then we produce the shirts, and every volunteer gets a thank you T-shirt. But the other thing it allows us to do is everyone who wears a shirt, they're allowed to start conversations. People say, hey, I like your shirt. What does AIR mean? And one-on-one conversations about good mental health and suicide prevention are started. And we've had shirts go to England and Australia and Saudi Arabia. One of our volunteers is sitting on a camel in the middle of a desert wearing an AIR shirt. So it's just about starting conversations.
It's interesting you say starting conversations. Is that a big part of this, that we're not talking about mental health?
It's a very big problem. In fact, we started off with we have an hour presentation that we do in this. We start off in the high schools and call it Coming Up for AIR.
Coming Up for AIR.
Coming Up for AIR.
By the way, go on the website, find out more information, get engaged, being part of the conversation. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, right. So we started off doing the presentation with high school students, and somebody suggested that we talk to middle school at one point, and we were a little
Isn't that too young?
Well, we had similar reaction to that, and what really woke us up to how important this was to have the conversation even younger was, during our presentation, we asked the question, how many here have known someone who has attempted, thought about, or completed suicide?
In middle school?
In middle school, we asked, all right, how many have known someone who's attempted, thought about, or completed suicide? And almost every hand went up in that room. And we, even being familiar with the subject matter, that really took us back. Because if parents could see how many of the students know people that are suffering, either themselves or their friends, I think that the parents would start to become much more engaged in what this issue is. Unfortunately, we as parents, we're guilty of the same thing. We think, well, maybe this is a phase, maybe this is just a passing, because we want to think that. And unfortunately, many more of our students are suffering than we realize, and they might need a little more help, and they might need a little more engagement. We need to talk a little more frankly with our kids and see how they're doing mentally, not just how they're doing in athletics, not just academics, but how is their mental health? How are they really feeling inside? Because oftentimes it's some of our more productive students. We hear this a lot from parents. Oh, my student's doing too well.
Excuse me for interrupting. Your son was an honor student in math.
Correct.
He was an athlete.
Correct.
So on the surface, someone might say, well, what's the problem?
Well, in fact, about a month before Kenny essentially became diagnosed, and he had his
We're looking
break.
at Kenny right now.
Right. As soon as Tricia and I had a conversation. He just started his freshman year of high school, and we actually had a conversation that Kenny's doing great. He's adjusted well to high school. He's excelling in academics.
Right.
He is a star swimmer on the swim team. He's socially engaged. When we walk through the mall, he can associate with every group of student
That's
is
what we
there.
all aspire to.
So we
It's a
actually
little
had
hope
that
for our kids.
Exactly. We were like, we essentially told each other, well, now we just need to kind of pay attention to Caitlin because she was younger.
She was a sophomore.
And we were like, we can kind of back off on Kenny, let him go, and if he needs us, we're there, obviously.
Well, what are you looking for then? I mean, what I'm struggling with is
Well,
we have kids who are 11, 10, and what are we looking for?
There were signs, and looking back on his life, I remember the signs, but you don't put it together. I always say there's no book reading what to expect when raising a child with mental illness. He always showed signs of extreme anxiety when he was a child. He worried a lot about things. And then as he got into high school, what was happening was he was actually sleeping less and less and less. There were some nights he was sleeping 2 hours, and I would say to him, Kenny, how is your body not shutting down? Never imagining that his brain was starting to shut down. And lack of sleep is a trigger to bring on depression.
The advice you have right now, because you came here for a reason. I believe we saw you on one of our colleague networks, and I said, let's get them in. They have an important story to tell, but more importantly, they want action. And Caitlin deserves a tremendous amount of credit for this, for her role in this.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you're very proud of her,
We are.
despite the horrible pain.
Yeah.
And I often wonder why you didn't pull the covers over your head and just say, the hell with it, I'm out.
This is very therapeutic for us because
Therapeutic.
Absolutely, because when we started this, we said if we spend the rest of our lives saving one child, we feel that it's time well spent.
Is that why?
Absolutely, because if that child was our child and somebody else had done that, we would be eternally grateful for that. And so we take that perspective that if we are spending our time trying to help those others who may not realize it, because if you are dealing with a child with a mental health disorder, you either don't realize it, or if you're engaged, it can be all consuming.
So right now, parents, advice to them watching right now.
Parents need to become much more engaged in education about understanding what the signs and symptoms of mental health disorders are, and they need to talk to the children more when they see something, like when their sleep patterns are changing, academics may be falling off, maybe social connection may be falling off, athletics, anything that seems to be changing in their life. They need to communicate better with their children and maybe find out what's happening, as well as talk to, in other areas, the physicians are starting to do this more.
Sure.
They're starting to benchmark. They're starting to actually ask questions about how your mental health is.
Pediatricians.
Exactly. They're starting to do that, which they had not done. They didn't do that
Get
with our children.
pediatricians involved in mental health.
Right, exactly.
Because if you start talking to them younger, how are you feeling? It's just basic questions. It only takes a few minutes. And if those questions start getting answered differently, you start to say, well, your child's no longer quite the same. Maybe we need to find out a little bit more.
What about teachers?
Teachers need to be educated, yes, because they were teachers.
To what?
To understand what signs and symptoms are. You know, Kenny met with a lot of discrimination in his school.
He did.
He did, because there were teachers who didn't understand his illness. People called him lazy. You know, here was
Lazy.
a kid who, as I said, was a math honor student, was a star swimmer. He swam 6 days a week, 3 hours a day until he had his breakdown. And then he was deemed lazy by some teachers.
And then he didn't go to high school.
He couldn't get himself to go to school because of the depression and the anxiety. And then people they make judgments about kids who just can't get themselves up. Buck up, deal with it.
But he had an illness.
Correct.
They don't
He had an
recognize that
illness.
part.
If a kid had cancer,
Correct.
you wouldn't make fun of the kid.
Correct.
He had an illness
Correct.
that he couldn't change
Right.
just by, quote, bucking up.
Correct.
And part of the issue that we run into is, of course, this is invisible, right?
Right.
If Kenny broke his leg, it was walking through the school, people would give him certain courtesies, give him a little bit of leeway, and so to speak. However, when there's a mental health disorder,
That's right.
We had one teacher comment, "Well, Kenny can't be sick. I saw him the other day, and he was laughing." And
Couldn't be sick, right?
Well, I think Robin Williams laughed quite a bit.
Yeah.
And we think that, as far as Kenny goes, our feeling is one of the things sometimes people do, especially if they have a good sense of humor, they will use laughter to create, if they make somebody else laugh, that's actually very therapeutic for them.
Yes.
And other comedians have said the same thing. So if you ever make somebody laugh, doesn't that make you feel good? You kind of make them feel, it
Absolutely.
makes you feel good. And Kenny did that a lot.
Yeah,
And-
Kenny was very quick-witted. He loved to make his friends laugh. His friend told us that anytime you're going out with Kenny Baker, you're always guaranteed to have a good time.
Well, we can't even imagine
Yeah.
the pain that you've experienced. But to say it's therapeutic for you, that's one thing. But the other part of what you're doing for so many others is just a tremendous public service. And I am confident through the work we're doing, public broadcasting, you've just shared your message with a lot of people. So to Tricia and Kurt and to your daughter, Caitlin, we thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very
We
much.
appreciate you allowing us to get the conversation started about good mental
It's
health.
the other way around. We're honored by having you here.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back right after this. Thank you very much.
One on One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this edition of One on One with Steve Adubato has been provided by County College of Morris, New Jersey Council of County Colleges, Wells Fargo, Health Republic Insurance of New Jersey, QualCare Inc., the Fidelco Group, and by the Russell Berry Foundation. Promotional support provided by the Star Ledger, powering NJ.com, and by Commerce Magazine. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.